Hello and welcome to Ex Libris. I am Aunt Gladys and today I am going to be going through 13 of my favourite horror novels. Seeing as we are just about to hit the spooky season, aka Goth Christmas, what better time? This has also been requested quite heavily, not by many people, just by one, multiple times. So we are going to have a good look at 13 spooky books. And without further ado, cue theme music. I don't have a theme song. So, what qualifies me to talk about horror books? First of all, recently I've had several comments from strange men on the internet and in person telling me, firstly, that I look like a character from the horror movie Weapons, and that I look like a nightmare elevator ride. Gotta give him points for originality on that one. And the fact that they are both men I mentioned for no particular reason, because really it goes without saying that they were men. And all of this is just to say, clearly, I have a face for horror. But more importantly, some of you who may have watched previous videos of mine will be aware that Stephen King was the instrumental author in my reader origin story. I have rediscovered horror just in the last couple of years in a big way. So the list that I am going to be talking about today doesn't include any Stephen King, just because, for one thing, it probably would have overbalanced the list in his favour. And also because it has been more than 20 years since I've read most of his best books. But having said that, I would like to just briefly mention my top 5 Stephen King favourites. So for me, the Dark Tower series is number 1. And I say books even though it is technically 8 books plus the extended Stephen King universe. Am I cheating by putting the Dark Tower series at number 1? No. Some might say it's cheating. I just say it's convenient. So at number 2, It. At number 3, The Shining. Number 4, Misery. And number 5, I'm going to say Skeleton Crew, because it does contain some of the greatest horror short stories of all time. Hands down. Okay, so these 13 books on my list, I did have them in some semblance of an order, but as I was making my notes, I got very confused. They're now a bit scrambled, but it doesn't matter. I love them all. So it is just very loosely ranked. So we are going to start with Diavola by Jennifer Marie Thorne, a story that poses the question, what happens when twisted, dysfunctional family dynamics meet a haunted holiday villa in Italy? What is more horrifying, a vengeful ghost or having to spend time with your family? This is a fun, funny, creepy, gothic thriller. Maybe a bit of a slow burn, but I quite enjoyed that. Basically, this follows Anna, who is the much maligned black sheep of her family. She is just trying to survive a family vacation in a rented Italian villa. But as you may expect, there is a lot more to this villa than what was listed on Airbnb. Strange things start happening in the house. Her family starts behaving in very peculiar ways for which Anna is inevitably blamed. She is the scapegoat of her family. And for anyone who says that the dysfunctional family in this book are unrealistic, I'm so glad you had a healthy and well-adjusted upbringing. So happy for you. Next on my list is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Very much a melting pot of genres, but I still stand by the fact that it is a kind of cosmic eco-horror. I have now read all 4 books on the Southern Reach quadrilogy, of which Annihilation is the first and, in my opinion, the best. What is known as Area X is a swatch of land somewhere on the American coastline in which plants and animals have entered a strange and alien level of growth and fecundity in very strange and unnatural ways. We follow one of a succession of expeditions into this area to study and try to understand what is going on. In Annihilation, this is a group of 5 women who make up the expedition, and as the story goes on, we learn a little bit about Area X, but mostly more questions are posed than answered. But it is so beautifully written, and it's a kind of strange, unsettling, destabilizing, and oddly beautiful, which is something that Jeff Vandermeer does so very well. The movie is also highly recommended. For such a slim novella, Ring Shout by P. Lee Clark packs a horrifying wallop. Set in 1915 USA, the book's central conceit is that the hooded members of the Ku Klux Klan are in fact literal monsters. Spurred on by the release of an actual historical blockbuster movie called spurred on by the release of a genuine historical blockbuster movie called Birth of a Nation, the Ku Kluxes are swelling their ranks and preying on the vulnerable. There's only a small number of freedom fighters who are trying to bring them down. So I did really appreciate in this book the attention to historical detail, because the impact of Birth of a Nation in its time cannot be underestimated or understated. I also really loved the monster design. Excellent monsters in this book. Truly horrifying stuff. Really well done. Speaking of excellent monster design, let me introduce you to one of the most hideous, terrifying, and grotesque monsters that I've ever encountered in fiction. Levi from Walk the Darkness Down by John Bowden. Slaughtering entire towns in one go, Levi takes a memento from each victim and attaches it to his own skin. He has swatches of skin, teeth, bones, and even rows of fingernails that are embedded in his arms like fish scales. It is truly horrifying stuff. This book is a cosmic Western horror, set in a land that is devoid of moisture or sympathy. As well as Levi, there are plenty of other grotesque and gruesome moments and characters, and a bigger cosmic event that some of our heroes are trying to prevent. I really love horror and I love westerns, and when they are combined, I am a very happy girl. If you also enjoy horror westerns, I would also recommend, obviously, the Dark Tower series by Stephen King and Red Rabbit by Alex Grecian. Yes. My next pick is The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. A self-described 6 on the S&M scale, Clive Barker knows a little something about the intersection of pleasure and pain. The Hellbound Heart tells the story of Frank, who in the pursuit of pleasure and his insatiable sexual appetite gets a little more than he bargained for in the form of a little lacquered box. This book and the subsequent movie adaptations introduced the world to the Cenobites, and namely Pinhead, some of the most enduring and iconic characters in the modern horror canon. And while The Hellbound Heart gets points just for being plain iconic and for bringing us Pinhead, what struck me is that there's just some plain good writing in here. Clive Barker is actually a very good writer. And there is a passage close to the beginning that really struck me, where Frank is basically being flayed alive, and the writing is just so good, so evocative. And for anyone at home playing along with Sarah's drinking game, take a shot every time I say flayed alive. Cheers. Next up, we have Bat Eater by Kylie Lee. Set during the COVID-19 pandemic, this book explores how fear can mutate into bigotry and violence, and also looks at the racism experienced by the Asian community during the COVID pandemic. This book touches on so many really important issues. It looks at, this story explores issues of alienation and acceptance, found family, as well as grief and trauma, which is dealt with very well. There's also wonderful backstory of Chinese hungry ghosts, and the praying to hungry ghosts, giving them food, which also leads to an absolutely fantastic banquet scene. I seem to be the kind of person who describes horror books with really over-the-top violence as being fun. But this is it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun. So this is an excellently written horror story with genuine creepy moments, a genuinely creepy apparition. The way that it's described and the way that it moves is incredibly evocative. And then I also really love that it touches on deeper issues, both personal and in the wider society. And if you enjoyed Bat Eater, or you think it sounds interesting, I would also recommend Reading on a Theme with The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. Which is about a young Korean American woman, a uni student, who, in dealing with a great deal of personal problems, manages to develop a fascination with men with blue eyes, and more specifically with what those eyes might taste like. This one is also excellent at investigating themes of racism, bigotry, misogyny, and specifically the Western fetishization of Asian women. And it's done in a really good way. Okay, so for a man who wears a pink bag on his head, Chuck Tingle has no right to be this heartfelt and tender and moving. My next choice is Camp Damascus. It's not a coincidence that this book has camp in the title, because it is fabulously camp. So this book is about a kind of mega church town in America that has a gay conversion camp with a 100% success rate. known as Camp Damascus. The young lady at the center of our story begins as almost a caricature of a warrior of God. She speaks in aphorisms and in Bible quotes and seems to be very much younger than her 22 years. As we go along, our central character begins to investigate her own history, her own feelings, her own coming of age story, and in doing so kind of breaks open the truth of what is happening at Camp Damascus. And while there are elements of kind of supernatural horror in this book, what I also found truly terrifying is the kind of religious industrial complex, which exists primarily in the US, but not exclusively. But this idea of fundamentalist Christianity and kind of extremist views are described so well in this book that even though Chuck Tingle's true identity is a mystery, I think it's fair to say that he grew up in some kind of fundamentalist Christian extremist kind of sect or something, because the detail, the attention to detail as far as the way these communities work and the way they operate is so perfect that it could only have been written by someone who had experienced it firsthand. Having said that, this is fun, it's funny. I do like my horror stories with a bit more of a deeper message, and that I think you can tell that from this list, but Camp Damascus is in equal parts horrifying and delightful. Next up, we have Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova. This is a meditation on grief and parenthood. This book begins with the death of a child, and a mother who, in her grief, removes a part of her dead son's lung and then puts it in a jar and begins feeding it with blood and flesh. The piece of lung begins to grow, and as it grows, it becomes more and more hungry for blood and flesh and becomes very much a traditional monster. What this book is kind of exploring is the love of a parent, and who in their grief is willing to do anything to keep their child alive. And it kind of looks at how, as a parent, do you continue to love a genuine monster, and yet there is so much love in this book. Despite the things that Monstrilio does, his family or his mother continues to love him, which is quite beautiful. This is a beautifully written book, and the message behind it is so tender and loving, and it does, like a couple of other books on this list, it kind of looks at themes of grief and parenthood and the fear of losing a child, which I'm sure most parents would say is their biggest fear, and therefore is one of the best fodders for horror novels. If you have enjoyed Monstrilio and you want to continue reading on this theme, I also really enjoyed Chouette by Claire Oshetsky. In this book, a young woman gives birth to an owl baby, and it kind of follows her and how she comes to, how as a parent do you love a child who is essentially a bird of prey, an apex predator, who is, you know, full of beak and claw and genuinely dangerous. In Chouette, I did love that this kind of can be seen as a kind of an allegory on neurodiversity, in that everyone around her is telling her that her child needs to be fixed, needs to be solved or saved, or that there's something wrong with her. But her mother is insistent that Chouette is perfect the way that she is. And in that sense, it's a really beautiful story. And speaking of parents of monsters, that brings us to The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. Much like the movie that was based on the book, they are both absolute classics. I really loved reading The Exorcist. It is very similar to the movie. You can see them as complementary sources, but nevertheless, the characters are so well written and well designed that I think the casting in the movie was absolutely perfect, and it was those actors I saw in my head as I was reading the book, and yet it fleshes them out a little bit. The dialogue in particular in The Exorcist is really well written. You can hear through the way that their speech patterns are written, you can really get a sense of their characters, particularly the investigator who is looking into various deaths. I can see why this would be so, like, particularly shocking in the 60s when it was... 60s? Exorcist, when it was first released in 1971. Religious horror is just so ripe for so many horror elements. Look, you're probably aware of The Exorcist in one way or another. It's about a young girl named Regan, not like the president, who becomes possessed by a devil. And it's about her mother, who is desperately trying to save her, and the two priests who are going to undertake an exorcism. It is a classic for a reason. I do encourage any horror fans to at least check it out. It is very much worth your time. I think this exemplifies the horror trope of taking a person or a being who is seen culturally as being very unthreatening, in this case a little girl, and making that the villain. The Exorcist just does this incredibly well. The scenes of Regan doing and saying horrible things is still quite shocking and frightening. If you have enjoyed The Exorcist and you would like to continue reading on this theme, may I recommend The Case Against Satan by Ray Russell. This book predates The Exorcist by about 9 years. It also is about a young girl who is possessed by a devil and the priests who have to perform an exorcism on her. You can very clearly see the influence of The Case Against Satan in The Exorcist. I do have to admit that I think The Exorcist does it ever so slightly better. Actually, not even ever so slightly. It's better. But the point of The Case Against Satan is more about the priests and their sense of faith. And you also see themes of this mistrust in both books of psychiatry and traditional medicine. The Reformatory by Tananarive Due is next up. We've already seen with Ring Shout the introduction of a horror element to historical incidences of racism. That is where the Reformatory comes in and does it incredibly well. This is another historical horror novel. I love it when authors take a true historical event or era that even in itself is already horrific in its own way, and then adds maybe a supernatural horror element to it in a way that just ratchets up the tension without taking away from the true life horror. This very much exemplifies kind of literary horror. It is incredibly well written, and it is also based entirely on fact. It is set in the American Jim Crow South in the 1950s. The story centers around a young black boy named Robbie, who one day, in protecting his older sister from the rich white landowner's son, kicks the boy in the leg and is then sent to a reformatory, which is basically run as a jail for children. While there, he is subjected to horrendous acts of abuse and violence and negligence and just awful acts. This is all entirely based on fact. These reformatories did exist. They were a way of removing young black children from their families and punishing them for really insignificant so-called crimes. And the abuse that these young people suffered in these places cannot be overstated. It's the legacy of trauma that still exists from places like this is truly awful. Tananarive Due brings so much compassion and warmth and just very talented writing to this story. But on top of all of this, young Robbie also has the ability to see ghosts or hates in this fact. Some of the interactions that Robbie has with these ghosts is truly creepy. Like, it's described in such a way that is genuinely chilling. He's just being bombarded on all sides from, abusive wardens and ghosts and hates and all kinds of things, racism, and it's just what a predicament. But it is told with such incredible talent. So I would see this as very much literary horror for anyone who, for all of those people who aren't watching, who look down on horror as being a lesser genre, a lesser storytelling element, you're wrong. You are wrong. Read this and tell me what you think. If you enjoyed this book, reading on a theme, I would also recommend The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This is not technically a horror story. It is literary fiction, but the events it describes are very much horrific. It also takes place in a reformatory for children, predominantly young black boys, and the abuse and negligence and horrifying things that happen to them there. And yet it's so beautifully written and heartbreaking, but incredible. It's an incredible book. Okay, next up we have Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. I would say that currently Mariana Enriquez is one of my favorite authors. I love the way she writes. She has currently released 3 books of short stories that have been translated into English at least, and then one absolutely massive novel called Our Share of Night. This book has everything. There is a cryptic cult. There is a father trying to protect his son. There's a queer love story. There are missing children. There's all kinds of weird shit going on. And while sometimes the pacing is a little uneven, the imagery and especially the rituals that the cult undergo, their ceremonies are truly off the wall bonkers, and some of the the best kind of horror moments that I have seen. Really nothing like it. where one man in particular is kind of the conduit for a being that this cult kind of worships. But he is also the father to a child who he is trying to protect from the cult. And in protecting his son, he ends up doing the most horrible things to his son to protect him. And in his son's eyes, almost becomes the villain because it's hard to reconcile between the acts of violence and neglect that this young boy is experiencing from his father, with the fact that it's for his benefit. And I really loved that dynamic that you hurt the ones you love in order to save and protect. You're actually damaging the people that you love the most. I would say don't be afraid of how big this book is. It kind of goes at a fast clip, and I felt propelled at every point of the way. But if you are a little intimidated by the size, then I would say try Mariana Enriquez's book of short stories, The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. As I mentioned, she's written 3 books of short stories, or at least 3 of those books have been translated into English. But of those 3, I think that The Dangers of Smoking in Bed is my favorite, and it has also been, it had previously been nominated for the International Booker, and her short stories are just phenomenal. Okay, so here's one I've talked about before, Uzumaki by Junji Ito. This was on my list of best books of 2024 that I had read, and it took me absolutely by surprise. I had heard so many great things about this manga, people who loved it, but I was not expecting it to absolutely blow me away the way that it did. I think even if you are not a habitual manga reader, this is very much worth your time. It is so unexpected. It is so twisted and weird and wonderful and creepy and weird. Did I say weird? Because it's pretty weird. So it's set in a small Japanese village, which is beset by spirals. And at the outset, you wouldn't think that spirals would be a frightening thing. Certainly not the main topic of a horror novel. And yet, this shape of spirals, this recurring theme of spirals, becomes so pervasive and starts to take over the citizens of the town and everything that they see, everything that they experience, that it will change your brain in a way that you're not expecting. It's been like, what, 2 years since I read this book, and I still cannot look at a cinnamon scroll the same way. Like, I can never look at spirals in the same way again. I can't look at spiral pasta without thinking of this book. And just when you think that it's not going to get any weirder, it gets weirder. It's just incredible how Junji Ito can take something that could never have been previously thought as a frightening thing, and he just runs with it and expands on it and turns it into something completely different and just absolutely wild. This is a book that you experience rather than read, and it absolutely stays with you for longer than feels comfortable, really. And now we come to my final horror recommendation, one that quite possibly might be my most favorite horror novel. We've already seen that I love historical horror, where an author takes an already existing horrific event and then adds something supernatural to it. Do you know what else I love? Cold things. Also, nautical drama set in the 1800s. That's my bag. Let me introduce to you The Terror by Dan Simmons. I love this book. I loved it so much. The genuine historical event that this book is based on is the 1845 Franklin expedition to find the Northwest Passage up near the Arctic. They were trying to find a route, a trade route, because everything was done by ships, obviously. So they're trying to find a trade route through between kind of northern Canada and the Arctic. And two ships set sail on this Franklin expedition, the Erebus and the Terror. The expedition is doomed almost from the start. Once they get into the Arctic, the ice freezes around them and they are trapped there for up to 2 years. No one can get to them. They can't call out. It's not like they can get on a satellite phone. To make things even worse, their food supply is tainted. The technology of tinned food is very new, and badly sealed tins lead to botulism, which leads to death. Also scurvy. Everything's just going terribly wrong. They're running out of food and water. They're running out of sanity. Their teeth are falling out. Scurvy's pretty bad, folks. And then add to that, as their food is running out, and this is the historical conjecture based on some bones that were found, human bones with what appear to be human teeth marks, they are resorting to cannibalism. So they're having a great time on this cruise. Now, what Dan Simmons does is add to that some enormous, frightening beast slinking out on the ice, hunting the men. And the way that it, like the historical detail is spot on. It's just so perfect. The depiction of being on a ship, hundreds of men on this tiny, cramped area, is incredibly well written. And you get this effect where it is both claustrophobic and agoraphobic, because they're trapped on these tiny little vessels with no space, no room, no privacy, in the middle of this vast expanse of ice where there's just miles of nothingness around them, and they're being hunted. So it is like this incredible feeling of being trapped and being squeezed into a small area of space surrounded by nothingness. The historical details are perfect. The horror elements are fantastic. There's some great action sequences that I really enjoyed. There's also an event about halfway through the book where the men put on kind of a festival on the ice, where they put up like the canvas sheetings and put coloured lights behind them so that it looks like there's kind of a fancy, you know, these rooms full of colour, which is a really effective homage to The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. I really enjoyed that bit. It's one of the centerpieces of the whole book is this festival on the ice. I mean, there's really nothing I love more than 18th or 19th century nautical dramas in a cold climate with a horror element. Perfect. Perfect. I'm a happy girl. More of that, please. And there you have it. 13 of my favorite horror novels. The list for this video was compiled from about, it was over 50 titles, narrowed down to 13. But having said that, since I have actually written this list and compiled this list of 13 books, I have read several other horror novels that I really enjoyed. So I would say this is going to be part one of a further series. Please let me know in the comments if that is something that you would like, more horror books. My channel is still so small that if one person requests something, there is a good chance that I will base an entire video around it, unless that request is more videos, because I've just got to. I don't know. I'll get there when I get there. So if there are particular genres or topics or recommendations that you would like me to focus on, drop a comment in the comments. Like and subscribe, all of that jazz. Yeah, cool.